A broken-down car, two buses, and an endless race against time. That's how Sarah's day begins. A single mother from Texas, her unexpected encounter with Sandra Bullock changes everything. A secret gift brings her son's smile back and restores her faith in miracles. Stay with us to find out the ending. Subscribe now. Mornings in Texas began with dust. Fine and persistent, it seeped through the cracks in the old window frames, settling on the sill where Sara, eyes still closed, fumbled for the alarm clock. The numbers on the screen blinked red, 5:03. For a moment, she allowed herself to freeze, inhaling the air scented with burnt-out light bulbs and the charred toast from last night's dinner. Then she moved like a wind-up doll, feet to the cold linoleum, hands to the bed where, under the blanket adorned with spaceships, little Aiden rustled. "Mom," he mumbled groggily, burying his face in the pillow. She didn't respond. Words were a luxury when every minute ticked away like an invisible metronome. Breakfast: oatmeal reheated in the microwave, an apple sliced into 6 neat pieces so he'd chews longer, the pediatrician had once explained. Clothes: her blue uniform with the cleaning company logo, his dinosaur t-shirt, which she had to turn inside out because he spilled juice on it yesterday. In the bag, a pack of wet wipes, a water bottle, a container of macaroni for lunch, and a plush tiger without which Aiden refused to board the school bus. The first mishap awaited at the door. The left sneaker hid under the couch, and Sara, on her knees, mentally cursed herself for not checking the night before. Aiden, now awake, giggled as he watched her hand with the cloth wrestle the shoe from the dusty trap. "Like a pirate!" he exclaimed, but she only tugged him by the elbow, pulling on his jacket. There was no time for pirate games. The street greeted them with a biting wind and pre-dawn gloom. The bus stopped, 2 blocks down, past Mr. Jackson's leaning fence and his eternally barking dog. Sara carried Aiden on her hip, the bag hitting her knee, and somewhere between the 3rd and 4th step, she remembered how just a month ago, everything was different. Back then, her rusty SUV, a gift from her late father, still grumbled to life on the second try, smelling of gasoline and old candy. They used to leave at 6:15, listening to Aiden's dinosaur chatter, and he laughed when she mimicked a T-Rex roar. Now the engine was silent forever, and the mechanic in the greasy pit, whistling, named a sum that made her fingers go cold. "Honey, this isn't a repair. It's a monument to your poverty," he said, and Sara, gathering the shards of her pride, left without looking back. Bus number 17 arrived at 5:45 sharp. Like clockwork, if her own watch didn't lag by 4 minutes. A broken bracelet with a digital display, a gift from her ex that she still couldn't bring herself to throw away. Today, like yesterday, they were running late. The driver, a man with a face like a crumpled paper bag, sighed as he saw her running figure. Sara, out of breath, waved her free hand, Aiden clinging to her neck, the bag slapping against her thigh in rhythm with her steps. "Sorry," she gasped, squeezing into the stuffy cabin that smelled of disinfectant and someone's overcooked lunch. Aiden, pressed against the window, waved to imaginary friends while she wiped the sweat from her forehead with a cloth tucked in her pocket the night before. The second bus, number 24, awaited them downtown, a 15-minute walk from the school. Sometimes, if they were lucky, they caught the early run, and then Sara could afford to buy coffee at the roadside kiosk. Today wasn't lucky. The bus door slammed shut in front of her nose, the red taillights of the stop signals fading into the distance. Aiden started crying, tired and tangled, and she, pressing him to her, whispered, "It's okay, baby, it's okay," though she felt anger and helplessness gnawing at her insides like rust. School. 7:20. Aiden, now alert, slipped from her embrace, rushing to his classmates, forgetting even to wave goodbye. Sara watched him go, tucking a stray lock of hair back into her bun, thinking that motherhood was a constant balancing act between gratitude and guilt. Then, a dash back to the bus stop, where bus number 103 took her across the city to the Skyline office complex. There, for 8 hours straight, she mopped floors, cleaned windows, and emptied trash cans that smelled of other people's lives. Expensive chocolate wrappers, crumpled receipts. empty perfume bottles with names she couldn't pronounce. Today, as the cloth wiped streaks on the mirror in the women's restroom on the 12th floor, Sara caught her reflection. Dark circles under her eyes, chapped lips from the endless rush, hands in gloves that suddenly felt foreign, rough, tired. Outside the window, cars crawled like shiny beetles, and for a moment, she imagined herself behind the wheel, windows down, wind in her hair, radio playing something silly and cheerful. Then the manager's shout shattered the fantasy. "Are you done here? The conference room is waiting." She finished. Always finished. They returned home with Aiden in the dark. The buses were now crowded, and he fell asleep on her lap, his face pressed against her stomach, while Sara, gazing out the dimmed window, thought about numbers. Rent, electricity bill, Aiden's new sneakers, the credit for that ill-fated engine. Sometimes the figures blurred into a gray haze, and then she pinched herself to stay awake. At home, after putting Aiden to bed, she stood under the shower until the water, first icy, then scalding, washed the day away. Then, wrapped in a robe with faded roses, Sara opened her laptop. She worked until midnight, typing texts, online surveys, anything that paid $1. Sometimes she fell asleep over the keyboard, waking up with a start, as if caught in the act of a crime. That night, before turning off the light, she looked at the watch bracelet. The hands showed 12:17, but time here, in this room, seemed to have stopped long ago. Sara reached for the shelf where her father's photo stood, him smiling in front of his garage, key in hand. "Sorry, Dad," she whispered. "I messed everything up." Outside the window, in the black sky of Texas, the stars were silent. But somewhere far away, in another part of the state, Sandra Bullock scrolled through the report of her charity foundation, pausing at story number 214. Single mother, 2 buses, working 3 jobs. The actress ran her finger over the screen, lingering on the line. Dreams of a car to spend more time with her son. Dawn broke. Somewhere beyond this world, shadows began to retreat. Sandra Bullock hated meetings, especially those held in the dimly lit conference rooms with panoramic windows, where every attendee reminded her of an actor in a poorly written play. Today's gathering for the Charity Foundation had already dragged on for 3 hours. Charts, figures, projects. The projector light picked out faces from the darkness, some bored, others overly enthusiastic. Sandra hid a yawn in her hand when her gaze fell on a printout in her folder. Story number 214. Sara M., 28 years old, single mother, works as a cleaner, courier, and bakery assistant. Son, Aiden, 6 years old, after her car broke down, spends 4 hours a day commuting. Dreams of fixing the car to see her son awake. The words were dry, like a bureaucratic report, but Sandra suddenly imagined the woman. Petite, with hair tied up in a bun to keep it out of the way, hands scarred from handling food containers, eyes accustomed to counting seconds. The actress reread the line about the car, and something inside her stirred. A familiar, almost physical sensation. She remembered standing on the side of the road 20 years ago, holding her sleeping daughter, with a stranger in a worn cowboy hat stopping to help. "Good luck, kiddo," he had said, and that kiddo sounded like "you'll make it." She interrupted the speaker, not even realizing she was talking. "I'll take this one personally." The room fell silent, but Sandra was already scrolling through files, searching for the address. A small town 3 hours from Austin. 2 days later, a rented pickup with tinted windows drove into the town where the streets smelled of fried dough and gasoline. Sandra, in a wig the color of dried asphalt and glasses with plain lenses, felt out of place like a teenager playing spy. But the makeup artist from her last film had done her job. Even the mirror showed a stranger, a woman with a tired face and wrinkles around her mouth that no toning cream could erase. She parked outside the diner, Daisy's, from where Sara, according to the report, picked up delivery orders. An hour passed in anxious waiting. Sandra sipped coffee, which was too strong here, and watched life unfold through the window. A boy with a balloon, an old lady with a shopping cart, a crowded school bus. And then there she was, Sara emerged from around the corner, almost running, holding a phone in one hand and the keys to a bicycle with a basket in the other. The wind tousled her hair, revealing worn-out sneakers. Sandra froze, recognizing details from the report. A plush tiger peeking out of the bag, a broken watch bracelet with a digital display. But no text could convey the main thing. How this woman moved, as if every movement kept time. Hurry, hurry, hurry. Sandra followed her, trying not to attract attention. She saw how Sara loaded boxes of pizza into the basket, how she adjusted her helmet, a gift from the foundation, as it turned out, how she zipped up her jacket while already riding away. The actress followed her across the city, noting the route. The school, where Sara, hunched under the rain, handed Aiden over to the bus driver. The grocery store, where she picked up a head of cabbage. Finally, Skyline, a glass fortress where she entered through the back door with a mop and bucket. By evening, when Sara, exhausted, emerged from the supermarket with bags, Sandra already knew her schedule better than her own. She watched as the woman tried to hail a taxi, but her phone was dead and her pockets were apparently empty. How Aiden, tired and cranky, tugged at her hand towards the bus stop. How the bag tore and cans of preserves rolled across the asphalt. It was then that Sandra stepped out of the car. She hadn't planned it, hadn't rehearsed it. She just stepped into reality, becoming, for a moment, not an actress, but a person. She silently picked up a can of beans and handed it to Sara, their fingers briefly touching. "Thank you," Sara whispered, not even looking up. Her eyes were fixed on her son, who was rubbing his nose with his sleeve. In that "thank you," Sandra heard everything: fatigue, shame, determination. She returned to the pickup, her hands trembling. Her mind was filled with images from the past. Her mother, working 3 jobs after her father's death, a neighbor who gave them a used refrigerator for Christmas, a blind musician in the subway whose melody once stopped her from stepping in front of a train. A chain of coincidences? No, threads. That night, in the motel room, Sandra took out a notebook. On the first page was a sketch, a pickup truck similar to the one that had broken down on Sara, but newer, more reliable. She added a bow on the hood. Then she opened her laptop, finding a photo of the garage her father had built 40 years ago in the foundation's history. It now belonged to the benefactors. "Jack," she wrote to her agent, "cancel my meetings for next week and find me the best auto mechanic in Texas." Dawn found her on the phone with the mechanic. "It needs to smell like new," Sandra said, watching as the school bus with sleepy children drove past the window, and put a chocolate bar in the glove compartment for the kid. She didn't know that a week later, Sara would be sobbing, clutching the keys to her chest. She didn't know that Aiden would call the car a spaceship. But even now, closing her eyes, Sandra saw them, mother and son, listening to silly dinosaur chatter, and that vision was warmer than any applause. Last night, the city smelled of petrichor and lilacs. The scent always reminded Sara of contradictions, the tenderness of flowers breaking through the roughness of neglect. She walked down the sidewalk, holding Aiden's hand, and counted the cracks in the asphalt, a game she invented to distract him from fatigue. "Look, Mom, a dinosaur," he exclaimed, pointing at the shadows resembling a lizard, though she only saw random lines. At the mailbox, a letter without a stamp awaited them. Invitation to participate in a charity foundation study, the label read. Inside was an address for a park by the river and a time, 7:30 p.m. Sara crumpled the paper but hesitated to throw it away. Compensation of $50 for participation, it promised in small print at the bottom. $50 meant new laces for Aiden, a light bulb for the kitchen, 2 packs of spaghetti. Sandra waited on a bench under a lantern, its light flickering in the gentle breeze. She chose this park deliberately. Amidst the maples and children's swings, it was easier to blend in. She wore plain jeans and a sweater bought at a clearance sale to avoid looking like an actress. In her pocket was a dictaphone hidden in a handkerchief. Questions about parental needs she rehearsed, but anxiety gnawed at her like a hungry dog. Sara appeared as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky the color of old wine. Aiden wasn't with her. left with a neighbor for the first time in 6 months. She walked with her hands tucked into her jacket pockets, and Sandra noticed how she flinched at every rustle, as if expecting a trap. "Mrs. M?" the actress asked, stepping forward. Sara nodded, hesitant to approach. Her gaze held a familiar mistrust, as if life had taught her to see deceit in every smile. "Thank you for coming. I'm from the Foundation. I have a few questions." They sat on the bench, separated by the lantern's shadow. Sandra turned on the dictaphone discreetly while Sara untied her worn-out boots. The initial minutes were spent on formalities: age, occupation, routine. The numbers sounded like a nursery rhyme, but Sara recited them evenly, as if long resigned. "Your biggest challenge?" Sandra asked when the swing's creaking faded into the silence. Sara hesitated. Her gaze drifted to the river, where the lantern's reflection shimmered like a golden jellyfish. "Time. There's never enough." She clenched her hands, as if trying to hold on to sand. "Aiden falls asleep on the bus, and by the time he wakes up, I'm already leaving for my second job. Sometimes I think." Her voice faltered, and she abruptly stopped, biting her lip. Sandra nodded, not pressing further. She knew that behind this silence lay months of suppressed tears, sleepless nights, the constant fear of not making it. "If you had one wish," Sandra began, but Sara interrupted with an unexpected laugh. "A wish? I've forgotten what that feels like." She waved her hand, and the lantern light caught the broken watch bracelet with frozen hands. "For example, if my old clunker suddenly came back to life, it would be like a monument to hope." Her laugh was bitter, like coffee without sugar. Sandra wrote something in her notebook, hiding the tremor in her fingers. She wanted to tell her everything about the garage being prepared, the car with chocolate in the glove compartment. But instead, she asked, "What would you do with an extra hour in the day?" Sara closed her eyes. The wind carried the scent of fried mince from a nearby fair, and for a moment, she was transported back to childhood, her father teaching her to churn butter, laughing at her clumsy attempts. "I take Aiden to the zoo. He always asks." Her voice broke, and she stood up abruptly. "I'm sorry, I have to go." Sandra didn't try to stop her. She watched as Sara walked away, hunched over as if carrying an invisible burden, and thought about how fragile the threads between people were, easily broken by a careless word. That night, Sara tossed and turned. In her dream, her father's clunker wasn't rusty, but sparkling, like the day it was bought. She drove down a road where stars replaced the asphalt, and Aiden laughed, chasing butterflies made of light. She woke up with a face wet with tears and silence echoing with the question, "What would you do with an extra hour?" Meanwhile, Sandra stood in the garage, which smelled of fresh paint. The mechanic, a young man with a dragon tattoo on his neck, started the engine, smooth, confident purr. "All set, Ms. Bullock." He smiled, handing her the keys. "She's like new now." The actress ran her hand over the hood, feeling the cool metal under her fingers. Somewhere in the city, a woman slept, unaware that her monument to hopelessness had become a ship ready to sail to new shores. "Soon," Sandra silently promised, watching as the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon. "Soon, you'll stop counting the minutes." And in the sky above Texas, the stars finally began to speak. The morning began with silence. Not the heavy kind that presses on your temples, but a light, rustling silence, as if the world was holding its breath. Sara stood by the mailbox, clutching an envelope with an unfamiliar Foundation logo. The address was printed starkly: Garage Number 12, Vyazov Street, 45. Inside, there were no explanations or notes, just a key on a star-shaped keychain. Aiden, perched on the porch railing with a dandelion fluff, asked, "Mom, is this from spies?" She didn't answer. Life had taught her not to question surprises. Too often they turn out to be overdue bills or debt collector calls. But today, something stirred within her. Maybe it was the thin paper of the envelope, reminiscent of her father's old letters, or the key nestled in her palm, warm like a forgotten summer. The journey to the garage took 2 buses and 40 stolen minutes from her schedule. Aiden chattered about robot dinosaurs, oblivious to her fingers clenching the bag too tightly, as if holding a living heart. Vyazov Street greeted them with rusty gates and faded signs. Garage number 12 hid at the end of an alley, its walls covered in ivy, resembling an abandoned lock. The door creaked open, revealing a corridor stretching into darkness. The air smelled of oil and fresh paint. Sara flicked the switch. The luminescent lights flickered, illuminating the space. It stood under a white cover, like a ghost from the past. A pickup truck, just like her father's, but with a glossy finish. On the hood, a bow tied with a ribbon. Aiden gasped, dropping his plush tiger, and Sara, stepping forward, stumbled, catching herself on the fender. The material was cool, almost gentle, and in that touch, she heard her father's laughter. "Well, kiddo, ready to hit the road?" On the windshield was a note. "The journey to the stars begins with a reliable ride. SB." The letters were carefully drawn, and Sara suddenly remembered the woman from the park, her quiet questions, and the subtle strength in her voice. Her fingers trembled as she inserted the key into the ignition. The engine purred softly, almost tenderly, and in that sound, she heard her father's voice. "Well, little one, ready to go?" Aiden dashed to the glove compartment. Inside was a chocolate bar and a tin with a T-Rex drawing. "This is awesome," he exclaimed, but Sara didn't hear him. She looked into the rearview mirror, where, far away, by the garage gates, stood a woman in a wide-brimmed hat. The sunlight caught her face, and for a moment, their eyes met, gratitude and humility, fear and hope. Sandra raised her hand, as if releasing a bird into the sky, and dissolved into the morning light. The first drive home took 10 minutes instead of an hour. Aiden pressed his face against the window, shouting every time a dog ran by or a shiny car passed. Sara drove slowly, as if afraid to shatter the fragility of the moment. The steering wheel under her hands was warm, almost alive, and the dashboard clock ticked away seconds that now belonged only to them. At home, parking the car, she noticed the crack in the asphalt, the same one she had called a dinosaur a month ago. Now it seemed silly, almost childish. Aiden, running out to the yard, began telling the neighbors' kids about the spaceship, and Sara sat on the porch steps, still clutching the key. In her pocket was the bill for the old car repair. Now it seemed like a relic from another life. That night, when the city fell silent, she went out to the pickup, sat on the hood, and leaned back. The stars here, far from the streetlights, shone brightly, like in childhood when her father showed her constellations. "Look, Dad," she whispered, "I found my way." And somewhere in a luxurious hotel, Sandra Bullock looked at a photo sent by her agent. Sara and Aiden by the car, both smiling. On the table lay an old notebook with a sketch of the pickup, and the actress, tracing the outline, thought that sometimes one spark is enough to ignite an entire galaxy. The morning no longer began with dust. Now it streamed through the open windows, laying golden stripes on the floor where Aiden, curled up, was assembling a Lego rocket. Sara stood by the sink, stirring oatmeal, and listened to the unusual rhythm of the morning. Drips of rain outside instead of the rumble of buses, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee instead of the stench of a cluttered garage from a keychain. The pickup truck waited by the driveway, covered in dew like a silver veil. The first week with the car felt like a dream. Every morning, Sara would start the engine, as if checking its reality before driving off. Today, Aiden, perched on the back seat, immediately pressed his face against the window, leaving fingerprints on the freshly cleaned glass. "Look, Mom, an ocean puddle!" he exclaimed, pointing at the rainwater, and Sara laughed, no longer rushing to wipe away the smudge. Once she would have hurried through it, splashing mud, but now time flowed differently, wide like a river in flood. The drive to school took 7 minutes. 7 minutes she filled with silly stories about astronaut dinosaurs, whose voices now came from the speakers. Aiden giggled, kicking the back of the seat, and Sara caught his reflection in the rearview mirror, rumpled, animated, not sleepy. When they pulled up to the school gates, he turned around and asked, "Can we have ice cream tonight?" Previously, she would have said no, citing chores, but today she nodded. Double scoop. Work. The Skyline office complex still gleamed like glass, but now Sara parked under the canopy, where raindrops tapped on the roof, playing a melody. She stepped out onto the elevator, realizing she had arrived 20 minutes early. Time, once stolen by buses, now belonged to her. Standing by the window on the 12th floor, she watched the city wake up, streetlights flickering off one by one, giving way to the sun, and her car in the parking lot below, looking small but not insignificant, a beacon in the morning's tapestry. Break time. Colleagues gathered in the break room where the coffee maker hummed, but Sara stayed in the supply closet. She pulled out a notebook and wrote the letter she had been composing for 3 days. Dear Ms. Bullock, you didn't just give me a car. You gave me mornings when my son doesn't rush, evenings when we count stars instead of cracks in the pavement. You gave me the chance to breathe, not just survive. Thank you. This is more than metal and gasoline. This is hope. Sara. She tucked the envelope into the glove compartment, deciding to send it later. Then she took out a cloth and, wiping the mirror in the restroom, saw her reflection, eyes no longer resembling faded puddles. They returned home, accompanied by the cacophony of children's songs. Sara turned on the radio loudly, and Aiden, humming along, kicked his boots against the seat. Along the way, they stopped at the grocery store, buying not just macaroni, but also a watermelon. Because today is special, she explained to the cashier, who saw her smile for the first time. In the evening, while Aiden colored in his album, Sara opened her laptop. Instead of data entry, mind-numbing work found a week ago, she made notes. Start small, the site advised, and she, biting her lip, made plans. Suddenly, Aiden brought a drawing. A car flying over the city towards the moon. That's us, he explained. You're a pilot now. Before putting Aiden to bed, she noticed that the watch bracelet on her wrist still showed 12:17. But time no longer stood still. It flowed like a river in every giggle of Aiden's, in every hum of the car's engine outside, in every step down the hallway she now walked without rushing. At night, Sara went out to the yard. The car stood under the stars, its hood glistening with dew. She sat on the bumper, feeling the cool metal, and remembered how her father had taught her to check the oil, the way he had laughed at her clumsy attempts. Look, Dad, she whispered, we're flying. And somewhere hundreds of miles away, Sandra Bullock received the letter and held it in her hands, unopened. Through the envelope, she could feel the uneven crease of a child's hand, and that was enough to know that the spark she had lit had already become a flame. The year is a circle of 36 spokes. For Sara, each spoke became a stepping stone between the past and the future. Her old clunker, once a rusty eyesore, now stood as a monument in the driveway, a testament to the miles she had traveled and the dreams she had nurtured. Every dent, every scratch on its body told a story, a journey through storms, a refuge for her son, a symbol of hope. Sara parked outside the offices of the Helping Hands Foundation, where she now worked 3 days a week. The building, which once smelled of stale coffee and desperation, now buzzed with the energy of volunteers and the scent of fresh paint. Inside, Sara's photo hung on the wall of fame. Her and Aiden by the car, the caption reading, "Hope is not just a word, it's a journey." Today, her task was a meeting with Lisa, a single mother of 3, whose story, like a mirror, reflected Sara's own struggles. Lisa sat across from her, clutching a can of soda, her eyes darting between the door and the clock. Sara sat quietly, not rushing to fill the silence with platitudes. They talked not about budgets or schedules, but about moments. How to find 7 minutes in a day to count clouds with your kids, where to find strength when it feels like the world is crumbling, how to distinguish genuine help from pity. "I need a car," Lisa blurted out, as if admitting defeat, "to get to work earlier while the kids are at school." Sara nodded, pulling out a set of keys from her drawer. "Let's go see something." They walked out to the parking lot, where an old microbus, donated by a local auto salon, stood under the shade of a tree. The paint was chipped and the seats were worn, but the engine purred smoothly when Sara turned the key. "It's not fancy," But it's reliable, Sara said, handing Lisa the keys. And it's yours. Lisa stared at the keys, her hands trembling. I, I don't know what to say. Sara smiled. Remembering the day, she received her own set of keys. You don't have to say anything. Just promise me one thing. Pass it on when you can. As Lisa drove away, the old microbus rattling down the road, Sara looked at the sky. The clouds, once heavy with doubt, now seemed lighter, as if carrying the weight of shared hopes. She walked back inside, the scent of coffee and fresh paint filling her with a sense of purpose. On her desk lay a stack of letters, stories of struggle and triumph, each one a testament to the power of a single spark of hope. Sandra Bullock, scrolling through her Instagram feed, paused at a photo of Sara and Lisa by the microbus. The hashtags #Wings of Hope and #Pay It Forward glowed beneath the image, a beacon of the ripple effect their actions had created. She saved the photo, adding it to her collection of moments that reminded her why she started the foundation in the first place. That night, as Sara tucked Aiden into bed, she told him about Lisa and her kids, about the microbus that would now take them on new adventures. Aiden listened, his eyes wide with wonder. Mom, he said, does this mean we're like superheroes? Sara laughed, ruffling his hair. No, sweetie. It means we're just people who care enough to make a difference. And as the city lights flickered outside their window, Sara knew that somewhere out there, another spark was igniting, ready to light the way for someone else's journey. The year might be a circle, but every spoke was a chance to change a life, to turn a rusty clunker into a chariot of hope.